She pressed a $10 bill into my hand and closed the door. Snow had been falling all day. I wasn't angry then. Not yet. Anger is a loud coat. I kept mine on its hanger. But that's how it starts, with a door closing quiet, with a bill too small to carry the weight of a family name. If you've ever been left outside, holding something cheap in your hand while the warmth stays on the other side of the glass, you'll know why I kept going. Why I wrote it all down. Stay with me. Don't miss the rest of this. She pressed a $10 bill into my hand and closed the door. Snow had been falling all day. I hadn't come to fight. I had ironed a clean shirt over the stove's heat and rode 2 buses across Erie with an old thermos rattling in my bag. I told myself we would sit at her table, Maya and I, and talk like people who shared a last name once. Through the glass I could see the halo of her kitchen warm bulbs, a jar of cinnamon sticks, a plant leaning toward the window, as if the house itself knew where comfort lived. Her coat stayed on. That was the first small signal. She kept her gloves tucked under her arm, as if this wouldn't take long. The smell of cinnamon reached the doorway, sweet and faint, under the sharper smell of wet wool steaming from my sleeves. I stood on the mat, careful not to drip on her polished floor. A bright children's show murmured from another room, canned laughter bouncing off the walls of a life that kept moving without me. "It's just for now," she said. 4 words, soft as tissue. My name was not part of them. The $10 bill was crisp in the middle and damp at the edges where my glove had bled through. She didn't take my thermos when I offered it. I had brewed coffee in the morning and saved half of it because I thought we might share a cup. When you want something to last, you heat it twice and pretend it tastes the same. The hallway smelled like new paint. Behind her, the table was set with a runner and a bowl of oranges. I had bought a bowl like that once for Maya's mother. Erin liked fruit piled high, called it abundance. The oranges were flawless, not a bruise among them, not a soft spot. I wanted to point to the chair at the end of the table and say, "Let me sit. Let me warm up a minute and ask you about your day." Instead, I held my breath and watched a string of water slide from my sleeve onto the mat, a thin, private river. "I can't, Dad," she said. The word Dad skimmed the surface and sank. "It's complicated right now. Just, we'll talk later." She pushed the bill into my palm like a ticket stub, something you use to pass a turnstile and then forget. $10 is gas money if you have a car. It's soup if you have a stove. It's nothing if you have neither. Inside the house, a phone chimed. Inside the house, life had notifications. I nodded because nodding was easier than showing my teeth. The door's brass caught the hallway light and threw it back at me in a flat smile. My breath made a small cloud that hung and drifted toward the porch ceiling. On the street, a SUV rolled by slow tires whispering over slush. I had rehearsed sentences all morning: how I had work now at the marina, how I was taking care of the little bungalow by the bay, how a person could start over if he kept his head down and his receipts straight. None of those words made it into the air between us. They felt like heavy coins in a pocket you're afraid to count. When she closed the door, it wasn't a slam. It was almost kind. That was the part that chafed. The latch clicked in a tidy way, like something being filed where it belonged. The smell of cinnamon disappeared. The cold stepped forward and took my wrists in both hands. I noticed then that I was still holding an old house key without a fob, a key that opened nothing in her life anymore. The metal burned a little where it pressed into skin. From next door, a boy shouted to his mother about a sled, his voice bright and sure, and a dog answered with a bark that shook snow from the porch rail. Warm light moved in the windows up and down the block. This is what I remember most about that evening: how the neighborhood didn't flinch. I was a quiet subtraction, a figure erased with the back of a pencil. Nothing tore. The world just made a small adjustment and kept writing. I tucked the bill into my wallet behind a faded photograph of my wife. Erin had been gone long enough that the corners had gone soft. There was a time I would have turned the photograph toward Maya, said, "Do you remember this? Your hair in that crooked braid, the cake too sweet and leaning, but memory requires a place to sit." The mat beneath my boots was not an invitation. I took the thermos back, still warm against my palm, and tasted the coffee. It had the metallic edge of reheated things, a little scorched, like pride left too long on the burner. The cold found the bone in my jaw anyway. I tightened my scarf and stepped down onto the porch. The first stair held, the second gave a wet sigh. My duffel slid against my leg, canvas rasping through the sound of the wind. At the sidewalk, I stopped and looked both ways like a child who still believed rules could keep him safe. The street lamps were halos on poles, their light softening the edges of the snowbanks. Across the way, a woman in a red coat lifted a pie from her back seat and carried it inside. The door closed behind her, and the slice of yellow vanished. I was not angry then. Not yet. Anger is a loud coat. I kept mine on its hanger. I was simply an older man with a thermos and a small bill, and a long way to go before the buses started running again in the morning. I could have knocked. I could have said, "Let me wait until the storm lets up. I won't be in the way." But I have learned that begging is a door that never opens where you need it to. I took out the key that opened nothing, rolled it in my fingers until the cold taught me I could put it down, and slid it into my pocket anyway. It's a habit with me keeping things I can't use yet, in case the future grows a lock that fits. I turned toward the highway. Beyond the roofs, the sky over Presque Isle was a dull bruise, the kind that means more weather is coming. Snow ticked in the air like static. I held the thermos tight and listened to my boots find their rhythm. If a man can't sit at a table, he can still keep his ledger straight. If a voice is not welcome in a warm room, it can be measured in the cold, in steps. I counted mine to the corner, then to the stop sign, then to the long strip of motel lights I knew would start blinking one by one as the evening leaned into night. All night the room smelled of bleach and burnt coffee. That was Harbor Lights Motel, room 1-2. The heater rattled like a tired smoker, and the carpet was damp no matter where I put my boots. I laid the thermos on the nightstand, still half full, still warm. It hissed when I twisted the cap, and the smell of metal rose stronger than the coffee itself. I counted the money in my wallet, a 5 ones, and the 10 Maya had given me. $16. I thought of her table, how the oranges glowed in the bowl, how not one of them had a blemish. On her counter, when she pressed that bill into my hand, I'd seen an envelope with First Federal printed on it. I had seen the color-coded tab she always used when she was behind on payments. Her hands moved quick to cover it, but I noticed. I always notice paper. The television offered me a game show rerun. A man in a bright suit shouted numbers while the audience clapped like their lives depended on it. Behind the thin wall, a couple argued about pizza toppings, their voices bouncing between laughter and irritation. Their life spilled into mine whether I asked or not. That's how loneliness works. You don't get silence. You get echoes of other people's noise. The sheets smelled of chlorine and old cigarettes. I pulled them up anyway, socks still on. My duffel slumped against the chair, zipper open. The photograph of Aaron and Maya, taken at Presque Isle years ago, slid halfway out of a side pocket. Maya was 7 then, hair in a crooked braid, laughing because the sand was too hot for her feet. Aaron had squinted into the camera, already restless, already looking somewhere else. I left the photo where it lay. Memories are heavier when you frame them. In a duffel, they can pretend to be paper. At 2 a.m, the heater stopped. The room filled with the hush of winter outside. And I listened to trucks hammering down I-90. Tires tearing up the wet road. I held my thermos close, not for the coffee but for the weight of it, solid in my hands, something that had survived the day with me. A smell drifted through the wall grease and onions from the motel diner. My stomach growled, but I stayed put. $16 had to last until Friday's shift at the marina. That meant no plate of fries, no pie. I thought of the cinnamon in Maya's hallway. That smell clung to me more sharply than the bleach in this room. It made my teeth ache with the sweetness of what had been denied. Somewhere down the corridor, a child coughed in his sleep. A woman hushed him, her voice a blanket I couldn't share. I turned my face to the wall and let the neon from the motel sign cut a red stripe across the curtain. That was my warmth for the night. I told myself this was temporary. Men have told themselves that in cheap rooms for centuries. But the truth pressed on my chest like the damp air. The family I thought I could lean on had not only stepped back, they had handed me a bill small enough to remind me exactly how little my weight meant. I closed my eyes and tried to picture her face when she was 7, not 34. That face had trusted me, had run to me, when a wave at the lake knocked her over. That face had known who to reach for. I held on to that, the way you hold a coin in your palm and press it so deep into your skin it leaves a mark. The heater clanged back to life near dawn, belching out air that smelled like rust. I sat up, drank the last of the coffee it tasted burnt and metallic, and counted my money again. $16 still. The number had not changed in the night. Outside, the snowplow scraped along the highway, sparks flying where blade met asphalt. Daylight bled pale through the curtain. Another day had started, indifferent to mine. I buttoned my coat, stuffed the thermos in my bag, and thought, if I can't count on warmth, I will count on receipts. Paper doesn't forget, even when people do. The marina smelled of oil and frozen fish. Wind came off the lake in long, sharp gusts that cut through every layer of cloth I owned. The boats groaned against their ropes, ice forming hard collars around the pilings. I was there before dawn, standing with the men who smoked with their gloves on, who kept their eyes down when they handed you a wrench. Nobody asked where I'd come from. At that hour, with the lake spitting sleet sideways, the only question was whether you'd stay. The foreman pointed to an aluminum hull streaked with rust and salt, a small fishing boat half buried in snow. "Scrape her clean," he said. That was all the introduction I got. I worked with stiff fingers, paint chips sticking to my coat, the rasp of the wire brush biting into my bones through the handle. The smell was bitter, a mix of metal and wet plywood. Every few minutes, I blew on my hands and watched the vapor disappear instantly in the wind. The gloves I wore had holes in the fingertips. By midday, the skin there was raw and purple. There was a kind of rhythm in it, though scrape, sweep, scrub, like counting steps, like telling yourself a story that doesn't need anyone to listen. Behind me, music drifted from a radio. Country ballads muffled by distance, the signal breaking up when the wind was high. Across the water, teenagers skated on the public rink, their shouts carried clear, ringing and bright. Their laughter rose and fell in the air like gulls. That sound was another country from the one I stood in. At lunch, I sat on an overturned bucket in the corner of the workshop. My thermos had gone cold. I unscrewed the top and drank anyway, metallic and sour. One of the younger men unwrapped a sandwich with steam rising off it, the smell of roast beef filling the air. He glanced at me but didn't offer half. I wouldn't have taken it if he had. Pride doesn't soften with hunger, it hardens. On the wall above the workbench was a bulletin board. Tax auction notice, pinned crooked with a rusted tack. Duplex on 9th Street, sealed bids due March. I read it twice, letting the words burn into me the way the cold had burned into my skin. A place with 2 doors. One for someone else, one for me. Not yet, but maybe. When the day ended, my knuckles were bleeding where the brush had worn them down. The foreman pressed $40 into my hand without ceremony. He smelled of diesel and wool. "Back tomorrow?" he asked. I nodded once. Words seemed unnecessary. Paper mattered more than talk. And the bills in my fist were already soft from his palm. Walking home, I passed by a bakery. Warm air burst out as a couple pushed through the door, the smell of sugar and butter spilling into the street. I slowed, let the scent hit me, then kept walking. My boots squeaked in the slush. The bakery window was crowded with children pressing noses to glass, their parents behind them with gentle hands on shoulders. I watched for a moment. Then I tightened my grip on the bucket I carried home borrowed, dented, streaked with rust. Proof that I had a task, a start. At the bungalow by the bay, the light didn't work in the back room, but I didn't need it. I set the $40 in a clean envelope, labeled it with today's date, and slid it into a drawer where no one but me would ever look. The skin of my hands cracked when I flexed them, but I felt a steadiness in my chest that I hadn't carried out of Maya's doorway. If the world wouldn't let me sit at its tables, I would build one from scrap wood and eat alone. And I would keep every receipt. The flyer was still in my pocket when I left the marina the next evening. It was damp at the corners from my gloves, but the words held, tax auction, March, duplex, 9th Street. Paper outlasts weather. I walked there the next morning. 9th Street was the kind of road where kids' bikes lay rusting on porches, where curtains stayed drawn even after sunrise. The duplex sat low to the ground, siding gone gray, one window cracked and stuffed with cardboard. A trash can tilted sideways on the curb, half buried in snow. To most people, it looked like a weight. To me, it looked like two doors. One I could rent, one I could lock behind me at night. The key was still in my hand when I pushed open the rotted gate. Not the one from Maya's house. This was an old skeleton key I kept from the marina workshop, a scrap piece of iron that fit nothing. I carried it for the feel of it, for the promise of locks that someday would wait for me. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and mouse droppings. The floor sagged near the kitchen, damp and dark. I crouched low, my knees cracking, and pressed my fingers against the swollen boards. They left my hands wet, the smell clinging. Upstairs, wallpaper peeled in strips, faded flowers curling down like tired flags. I ran a hand along the wall and thought of the money. I had $80 in my drawer, folded into 2 envelopes, 40 from the boat, 40 from yesterday. It wasn't enough, not even close. But it was paper, and paper is louder than words. A neighbor came out with a shovel, red cap pulled down low. He looked at me a long time before speaking. "Place has been empty 5 years," he said, his breath clouded between us. "Basement floods every thaw." I nodded, kept my hands in my coat. "Basements can be drained." He gave a dry laugh. "Sure. If you've got the back for it." I didn't answer. I just pressed the flyer flat in my pocket and turned back to the street. On the way home, I passed a corner store. In the window, kids crowded around a lottery machine, tickets crumpled in their fists. One boy scratched and whooped, his friends shouting. The prize glowed on the screen, $10,000. Their voices carried, high and fierce, all the way down the block. I thought of Maya's $10 bill, limp and small in my palm. 10,000 could buy more than a duplex. $10 couldn't buy heat for one night. At the bungalow, the back room was colder than outside. I set my thermos on the table, pulled out the flyer, and smoothed it flat. The ink had bled from my gloves, leaving faint shadows along the edge. I wrote the date in the corner. My handwriting shook, but the numbers stood steady, the 12th of January. The basement floods didn't scare me. I knew rot. I had scraped it from hulls, tasted it in the air at the marina. Work was work. What mattered was the 2 doors. 2 doors meant a choice tenant and owner, stranger and keeper. For a man pushed out of one doorway, that mattered more than warmth. I placed the flyer in the drawer beside the envelopes of cash. $80 looked small against it. The heater coughed in the corner and went quiet again. From next door came the sound of children laughing at a cartoon, their voices spilling through thin walls like light through cracks. I sat at the table and let the silence settle. I had no family at my side, no plate of oranges shining on polished wood. But I had paper. And paper has patience. The bungalow was colder than the street when I stepped inside. The back door groaned on its hinges, and the air smelled faintly of dust and old plaster. My hands shook as I lit the single lamp in the kitchen. The bulb hummed, weak yellow spilling across the table. I set down my thermos, empty now, and rubbed my wrists until the blood moved again. The heater rattled once, coughed, and fell silent. The silence afterward was heavier than the cold itself. I filled the kettle at the sink. The water ran brown at first, then cleared. When it began to boil, steam clouded the window above the sink, blurring the lights of the houses across the bay. Their windows glowed gold, every one of them a stage where people sat close, ate hot food, passed plates. I stood barefoot on cracked linoleum, waiting for a whistle. The kettle screamed too loudly in the quiet. I poured into a chipped mug, the crack running down one side like an old scar. I dropped in the last of a tea bag that had been steeped twice already. The taste was weak, more memory than flavor, but it warmed my throat. On the wall above the table hung a frame. Inside was a faded photo of Aaron, smiling just enough for the camera, and Maya, braids crooked, grinning wide with frosting on her chin. The glass was dusty. I reached up and wiped it with my sleeve. The smile blurred for a moment under my breath. I thought of Maya's kitchen the night she gave me the $10. The smell of cinnamon had filled the doorway. On the counter, just beyond her arm, was that envelope from the bank. She had pushed it aside quickly, but I'd seen the red stamp in the corner past due, that memory cut sharper than the cold. $10 for me, a new SUV for her, a house filled with store-bought warmth. I held the mug closer, felt the ceramic burn against my palm, and reminded myself, appearances are louder than truths, until paper speaks. I sat at the table, the wood scarred from years of knives and plates. $80 in envelopes lay in the drawer beside me, along with the flyer for the duplex. I took them out, spread them across the table. The paper was thin, edges curling, but the sight steadied me. It was more than I had yesterday. Less than I needed tomorrow. Outside, a car door slammed. Children laughed, their voices skipping across the street. I heard the clink of dishes, the sound of chairs scraping back from a dinner table. Life carried on just beyond these thin walls, loud enough to remind me of where I wasn't. I pressed the cracked mug against my chest and closed my eyes. The tea had gone lukewarm, but I held it anyway. A man learns to take heat where he finds it. I told myself this. If Maya could hand me $10 as if that was enough, I would make every dollar I earned weigh 10 times heavier. If she could build her comfort on shadows, I would build mine on paper that didn't lie. The lamp buzzed, dimmed, and steadied again. I sat in its circle of weak light, alone but not empty. I had a kettle, a mug, and a drawer with paper in it. Sometimes the smallest ledger is where you start to rewrite your name. The phone began to buzz on the table while I was rinsing the cracked mug. The sound startled me. Nobody called me at that hour. Most days, nobody called at all. The screen glowed against the dim kitchen light. Maya. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, a misdial. I wiped my hands on my jeans and let it ring once more before sliding my finger across the glass. Her voice was bright, rehearsed. Dad. I was just thinking maybe we should get together. Dinner, maybe. Just the family. The words were smooth, like they'd been practiced in a mirror. My first instinct was to believe them. That's the trouble with memory, it always wants to forgive. I stood with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the hum of her silence between sentences. The kettle ticked as it cooled on the stove, a faint echo under her voice. Dinner, I repeated. My own voice sounded like gravel. I thought of the $10 bill she had pressed into my palm, of the red stamp on the bank envelope she had tried to hide. I thought of the SUV gleaming in her driveway. When? This weekend, she said. I'll make something nice. You should come. Her tone carried the same warmth as the oranges in that bowl on her counter. Bright, perfect, impossible to trust. I wanted to ask why now, after months of silence. Instead, I asked the one question that mattered. Who else will be there? She hesitated just long enough. Just me, Nate, Mom maybe, nothing formal. I glanced at the drawer where my envelopes lay. $80 in paper, thin and fragile, and a flyer that smelled of mildew and ambition. Dinner was a kind word, but I had learned to measure words against actions. Actions left receipts. I'll come, I said finally. My thumb pressed the record button on the small app at the top of my screen. The red light glowed. If she wanted to speak, I would keep her words as carefully as I kept my bills. We spoke for another minute, surface talk, the kind that fills air but leaves no trace. Then she signed off with a sweet, "Love you, Dad." That felt lighter than smoke. The call ended, the screen went black, and the room was still again. I sat at the table, phone flat on the wood, listening to the faint scrape of a shovel outside as a neighbor cleared his walk. A child laughed in the distance. The world had no idea that something had shifted, that a door cracked open after months of being nailed shut. But I had lived long enough to know. When a door opens suddenly, it's often to pull you closer to the edge. I poured what was left of the boiled water into the mug, watched the steam rise and vanish. My hands were raw, my back stiff, but my resolve felt steadier than it had in months. Paper doesn't lie. And now, I had her voice on mine. The next evening, the air carried the smell of thawing snow, wet earth rising where the plows had cut through the drifts. My hands still ached from scraping hulls, the cuts along my fingers red against the screen as I held the phone. I stared at Maya's name before pressing call. It rang twice. She answered with the same bright note as the night before, like a song rehearsed just for me. "Dad, I was just about to call you." I let my voice drag slower than usual, let the gravel sit heavy. "I need to tell you something, Maya. Things aren't good. The marina cut my hours. I'm behind on bills. I don't know how I'll manage." The silence on the other end was sharp, as if the air itself had stopped. I could hear faint kitchen sounds in the background, plates clinking, a timer chiming. She didn't fill the silence right away, and that told me everything. When she did speak, her tone had dropped an octave, the brightness drained. "Oh, I see. Well, maybe dinner isn't the best idea right now. We'll find another time. When things settle down." It took 12 seconds. I counted them in my head, the way I used to count Maya's strokes when she swam at Presque Isle as a child. 12 strokes then brought her back to shore. 12 seconds now carried her away from me. I said nothing, just let the line hang while her words cooled between us. "Anyway," she added quickly, "I've got to go. Nate's calling me. Take care, Dad." The call ended with a click that sounded louder than any slammed door. I looked down at the phone. The red recording light was still glowing. Outside, a boy in a red hoodie skated down the street on a battered board, wheels clattering over patches of salt and ice. He whooped into the night, his voice echoing. His mother's window was open. I saw her lean out, smiling, calling him in for dinner. Warmth in a single syllable. I felt it from the sidewalk, even with glass between us. Back inside, I set the phone on the table. Screen dark. My thumb brushed over the cracks in the glass protector. Lines like scars. I thought of the first time Maya had called me from school, her voice high, urgent, begging me to pick her up after she'd fallen on the ice. I had run every red light to get there, heart pounding harder than the sirens I heard in the distance. That voice had been real. This one? This one was for the stage. I slid the recording into a folder on my phone labeled simply, paper. The same word I wrote on every envelope of cash in the drawer. The house was cold. The heater hadn't kicked in all night. I filled the kettle again, the water running sluggish from the tap. As it boiled, I leaned against the counter and pressed my thumb into the fresh cut along my palm. Pain kept me awake better than coffee. Her love you from yesterday had been weightless. Tonight's silence weighed more than iron. I poured the water into the mug, steam rising into my face, softening the sting in my eyes. Outside, the boy's laughter faded as he went inside. The door closed. Another table I wasn't invited to. I lifted the mug to my lips and whispered into the empty room. "Thank you for your honesty, Maya." Because words meant nothing, but silence that left a mark I could measure. The next morning I sat in the diner across from the bus depot, the kind of place where the air smelled of bacon fat no matter the hour. My hands stung when I wrapped them around the chipped coffee mug. The heat pushed into the cracks along my knuckles, red lines that hadn't healed since the marina. Every sip tasted faintly of bleach from the dishwater. I wasn't waiting for eggs or company. I was waiting for her. Delia Park slid into the booth opposite me, shaking snow from her coat. She didn't waste words. A brown folder hit the table, heavier than the coffee pot beside it. "Paper has its own gravity." "Your daughter's store," she said. She tapped the folder once. Her nails were short, bitten down, but her finger left a sharp sound. Bay and Birch. 2 addresses, neither real. I opened the folder. Pages of printouts, screenshots, customer complaints. Faces blurred in thumbnails, angry words in bold. Refund ignored. Package never arrived. Scam. I touched the paper with the same caution I'd used testing rotten floorboards in the duplex. The texture was slick from the printer, but the weight of it was solid. Delia kept going. Registered under a shell, LLC. Returns routed through a warehouse that doesn't exist anymore. Credit card disputes piling up. If the state AG takes one look, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I thought of the red stamp on Maya's bank envelope. Past due. The oranges shining in her bowl. The SUV in her driveway. The pieces clicked together the way wood fits after a long day of sanding. It took time, but the grain showed its truth. Delia slid another envelope across the table. Lighter, but sharper somehow. Your ex-wife, she said. The wellness blog. Donations for treatment. She's raised 25 grand. Hospital confirms no record of her ever being admitted. Not once. Not once. I didn't touch that envelope right away. I stared at it while the diner filled with noise waitress calling orders, a baby crying in a corner booth, the hiss of the griddle. All ordinary sounds. All steady. My life had lost that kind of steadiness. I reached for the envelope. Inside were screenshots of the crowdfunding page, photos of Aaron smiling faintly in hospital gowns that didn't match any local ward, captions about ongoing battles and miracle recoveries. The comments beneath were worse than the text. Prayers, promises of candles lit, small donations from people who looked poorer than me. I shut the envelope before my coffee cooled. Delia leaned back, her coat creaking. You asked for paper. There it is. I nodded once. I couldn't trust words anymore, not even my own voice. But these pages would hold. Outside the window, snow fell in slow spirals onto the bus platform. A family huddled together, the father holding his daughter close. Her pink hat tilted over one eye. They laughed as the wind blew snow into their faces. I watched them until they disappeared onto the bus. I folded the folder closed, slid it into my bag beside the thermos and the envelopes of cash. The weight nearly tipped the bag over. When I stood, my knees ached, stiff from the booth, from years, from everything. Delia was still watching me. What will you do? She asked. I put on my coat, button by button. My fingers shook from cold, not nerves. I'll let the paper do the talking, I said. The bell above the diner door rang as I stepped into the snow. The folder sat on my kitchen table all night, its edges curling in the damp air. I hadn't opened it again. I didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. Heavier than any meal. Heavier than any sleep. By morning I laid out my own papers beside it, the envelopes of cash, the flyer for the duplex, the receipts from the marina, thin sheets, but steady. Each one, a nail. I drew a line down a page in my notebook. On the left, I wrote 7:30 p.m. On the right, 8:05 p.m. 2 times, 2 doors, 2 strikes. The kettle whistled, and I poured the water into my chipped mug. Steam rose and blurred the numbers I had written. For a moment it looked like the page was breathing. At 7:30, Maya would open her door. She expected me to bring appetite and forgiveness. Instead, she would receive a knock from someone else, a process server carrying the collective complaints Delia had given me. Pages she couldn't sweeten with candles or oranges. Pages that didn't forget. At 8:05, Erin's house would glow with her own kind of comfort. By then, Ramon Vega's article would be live, the screenshots public, the questions loud. Donations for treatment? Where is the treatment? Where is the truth? Not whispered in court, but shouted through every feed that had ever shared her smiling photographs. The plan felt less like revenge than arithmetic. 2 sums balanced, 2 debts returned. I closed the notebook and slipped the pen behind my ear. The heater coughed once and went still again. Outside, children's voices carried in the snow, dragging sleds across the street, their laughter high and clear. It sounded like another life, one where paper wasn't necessary to prove you belonged at a table. I took the empty gift box from the cupboard, a square of cardboard I had kept from Christmas past. Its surface was smooth, still wrapped in dull red foil, bow flattened from storage. I set it in the center of the table, a box that promised weight and carried nothing. When I looked at it, I thought of Maya's voice on the phone, bright, warm, and hollow. I thought of Erin's photographs in gowns she never needed. They had both become gift boxes, shiny from the outside, nothing within. I placed the folder inside the box, just to feel the heft. The lid closed with a soft sigh. I knew I wouldn't carry it to their table, but the image stayed in me. A reminder of how much weight could be hidden behind silence. The lamp above the table buzzed, dimmed, and steadied. I took a slow breath. It wasn't anger that filled me. Anger was noisy, reckless. This was different. This was ledger work. I wasn't plotting a storm. I was balancing a column. 2 times. 2 strikes. The rest was just waiting. By evening, the streets had begun to glaze with a thin layer of ice, black and near invisible until the headlights found it. I drove the borrowed truck slow, wipers squeaking across the glass, heater rattling at my knees. My hand ached against the wheel. The small cuts splitting again where the leather rubbed. Every turn stung. Mill Creek lay 10 minutes west, though the night stretched it longer. Each block passed felt like a chapter closing. Houses grew larger the closer I came, 2-car garages, wreaths still hanging on polished doors though Christmas had been weeks ago. Their windows glowed warm as stage lights. Families moved behind them in silhouettes, someone pouring wine, someone laughing with a hand on another's shoulder. It looked rehearsed, perfect. On the seat beside me lay the red gift box. Empty, but heavier in my mind than the folders hidden back at the bungalow. The bow had flattened with age, curling at the edges, and in the weak dashboard light, it looked almost bruised. I kept glancing at it, as if it might speak. The notebook was folded inside my coat. I had checked it before I left. 7:30 written on the left, 8:05 on the right. My handwriting shook where the pen had pressed against rough wood, but the numbers stood steady. Paper does not lose its nerve. Halfway down Peach Street, the radio flickered through static into a song I used to whistle when Maya was a child, some soft country ballad. She would sit in the passenger seat, swinging her legs too short to touch the floor, humming out of tune. For a moment the memory pulled my chest tight. I nearly turned the knob to silence, but left it on. It is dangerous to erase reminders. They come back louder if you do. Snow thickened as I pulled into their subdivision. The truck tires crunched against packed powder, muffled but steady. Driveways here were cleared sharp to the concrete, lined with salt like guarded borders. At one house, 2 boys wrestled in the snow, their parents calling from the doorway, laughter spilling out into the street. I slowed, let them finish their game before I passed. When I finally turned onto Maya's street, the houses all seemed to tilt toward hers. A glow in every window, porch light burning bright, shadows moving behind curtains. Her SUV sat in the driveway, spotless, the chrome catching every stray beam. I parked a little way down, cut the engine, and sat in the dark. My hands rested on the wheel, stiff with cold and caution. I could hear the faint echo of music from inside her house, something soft, a playlist chosen to sound effortless. The clock on the dash ticked past 7:20. 10 minutes. I pressed my thumb against one of the cuts in my palm until it stung awake again. Pain reminded me I was not dreaming, not drifting. This was ledger work. The sum had to balance. The gift box sat silent on the seat. I ran a hand across its lid, cardboard cool against my skin. I imagined it on their table, gleaming under warm light, waiting for hands that thought they deserved whatever it held. Outside, a gust of wind blew snow against the windshield, the flakes scattering like paper torn into shreds. I watched them dissolve into the glass until the world blurred. Then I opened the door, stepped out into the cold, and let the street swallow me toward her house. The house smelled of rosemary and butter when Maya opened the door. The warmth rushed over me too quickly, too thick, like perfume sprayed to cover something sour. "Dad," she said, her smile stretched just enough. She kissed my cheek without touching me and pulled me inside. The table was already set. White plates, polished silver, candles flickering low. In the center sat a bowl of oranges, piled high the way Aaron used to do, each one shining like it had been chosen for display. A holiday catalog in February. I slid my coat from my shoulders, feeling the ache in my arms from gripping the wheel. My hands still burned where the cut split open. The scent of rosemary clung heavier now, mixing with the faint tang of wine. Nate appeared from the kitchen with a dish in his hands, a little too loud in his greeting, a little too rehearsed in his grin. "Good to see you, Greg." He set down the roast like it was a prize. I nodded once. No more. The empty gift box sat beneath my chair, red foil dull in the candlelight. I had carried it in without comment. Nobody asked. Boxes are expected in houses like this, especially when family is gathered. We took our seats. Maya at the head, Nate beside her, Erin across from me. She wore a soft shawl, her hair falling loose. She looked healthy, too healthy for the stories her blog told. I tried not to stare. Maya leaned forward, voice smooth. "Dad, we've been talking. About opportunities. About the future. You've done so well with the bungalow, the marina, the duplex." She glanced at Nate, then back at me. "And we think it's time to build something bigger, together." I let her words hang in the air. My muggy reflection wavered in the wine glass in front of me. She pushed a folder toward me, cream-colored, crisp. "We need a partner, Dad. Someone solid. Just $180,000 gets us Expansion Bay and Birch storefront. New lines, new markets. You'll triple it in a year." Erin nodded gently, as if blessing the plan. "It's family, Greg. Safer than anything else." Nate lifted his glass. "And we'd manage everything. You wouldn't have to worry. Just watch it grow." The candlelight flickered across their faces, earnest, glowing, perfectly staged. The kind of glow people believe in until the lights turn off. I placed my hand on the red box under the table. Its edges pressed against my knee, sharp and empty. I thought of the $10 bill in Maya's doorway. Of the past due envelope half hidden beneath her hand. Of Erin's hospital gowns that matched no ward. Of the children outside laughing into warm kitchens that weren't mine. My voice came slow, even. "Give me 10 minutes. Maya blinked. 10 minutes for what? I rested my palm flat on the lid of the box, steady. To think. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence. The second hand slid toward 7:27. The fork trembled in my hand as I tried to cut the roast. My knuckles wouldn't close right, the cuts reopening under the pressure. A bead of blood welled near my thumb, dark against the white napkin when I dabbed it away. No one noticed. Their eyes stayed on the folder in the center of the table, the one Maya had slid toward me like an offering. "Dad," she said softly, "this is your chance. You've earned it. We can build this together." The word together clung in the air, thin as steam. I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the bowl of oranges, each one flawless, stacked so carefully they looked more like ornaments than food. I remembered the first time Erin had set a bowl like that, back when she said it made the table feel abundant. That night we ate stew with stale bread. Nothing was polished, but everything was honest. This table, with its candles and perfect fruit, felt like theater. The clock on the wall ticked louder than their voices. The second hand slid toward the mark I had written in my notebook. 7:30. Then came the knock. A sharp, official rhythm, 3 firm raps that cut through the warm air and froze the room. Nate laughed too quickly, trying to disguise his startle. Erin shifted in her chair, pulling her shawl tighter. Maya glanced at me, confusion flickering across her smile. "I'll get it," she said. The sound of her heels on the wood floor echoed into the hallway. Another knock followed, more insistent this time. When she opened the door, a man's voice carried back into the dining room, flat and professional. "Are you Miss Maya Whitlock?" "Yes, I am." "Consider yourself served." Silence, then the faint shuffle of papers against her palm. The air in the dining room tightened. Nate sat straighter, his face hardening in increments. Erin's hand went to her glass, fingers trembling just enough to ripple the wine inside. Maya returned, the envelope clutched awkwardly against her side, her smile gone stiff. She placed it on the table beside the pristine folder she had offered me. The 2 envelopes touched hers, fat with complaints and charges, hers thin with promises. One held her truth, the other her performance. No one spoke. Only the clock filled the space, ticking past 7:31. I rested my hand lightly on the red gift box beneath my chair. Its edges pressed sharp against my knee, reminding me that appearances weigh nothing until paper gives them gravity. "Dad," Maya whispered finally, her voice breaking the quiet. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. The sum wasn't balanced yet. The second hand ticked on toward 8:05. The silence at the table grew thick enough to taste. Rosemary hung in the air, heavy and sour now, clinging to the back of my throat. The clock on the wall ticked forward, each second a nail driven into the room. Erin broke first. She reached for her glass, her bracelet clinking against the stem, and tried to fill the space with words. This is just a misunderstanding. Paperwork. You know how it can be. People complain online all the time. Her voice wavered at the edges. I watched her hand shake, wine rippling in small red circles. Maya pressed the envelope flat against the table, as if weight alone could silence its contents. "Dad, this doesn't change anything," she said quickly, eyes darting between me and Nate. "The plan is still solid. We need you to trust us." The clock struck 8:05. Somewhere outside, a phone buzzed. Then another. Then Nate's screen lit up on the table. Notifications rolled in fast. One after another headlines, messages, alerts. He snatched it up, thumb moving frantic across the glass, his face blanched in the glow. Erin's phone chimed next. A single note. Then another. Then a cascade. She fumbled in her shawl, eyes widening as her screen filled with the same flood. Maya's phone, last of all, began to vibrate against the wood. The sound was low but relentless, a wasp trapped in glass. She didn't pick it up. She just stared at me, as if I had brought the storm in with my coat. The air changed. Whatever warmth the candles had offered dissolved. The room was lit now by the cold blue light of their screens. Words leaked out in fragments as they read fraud, donations, false claims, scam storefronts. Each word louder than the last. Nate cursed under his breath. Erin covered her mouth with one hand, knuckles white. Maya finally reached for her phone, and I watched her eyes skim lines she couldn't erase. "Dad," she whispered. It wasn't an accusation, not yet. It was closer to a plea. I said nothing. My hand rested on the red gift box under the table. Empty, but heavier than all their promises stacked together. The clock ticked past 8:06. Through the window, the neighborhood glowed on. Families ate. Children laughed. Televisions hummed. The world outside didn't pause for theirs to collapse. I raised my eyes to meet Maya's. Her face was pale now, the practiced smile gone. "What did you?" she began, then stopped. I let the silence answer. Because for once, the silence was theirs, not mine. The table no longer smelled of rosemary. The air had turned stale, heavy with candle smoke and fear. Their phones kept buzzing, each vibration louder than the last, until it felt like the wood itself trembled beneath our plates. Maya's hand shook as she set her glass down. The red wine sloshed against the rim, staining the white cloth. Erin's shawl slipped from her shoulders, and she didn't notice. Nate leaned back, his jaw tight, the glow from his screen making his face look older, harsher. I bent down and lifted the red box onto the table. The foil caught the light, dull but steady. I didn't open it. I just placed it between the candles, beside their folder of promises and the envelope of complaints they could no longer ignore. Their eyes went to it as if weight alone made it dangerous. "What's in there?" Maya's voice cracked, the same voice that once called me from a skating rink, crying for help when she fell. Back then I ran to her. "Tonight?" I didn't move. "Nothing," I said. My tone was calm even. "That's the point." The silence after those words was thicker than any argument. I could hear the clock ticking, the faint hiss of the roast cooling, even the pop of a candle burning low. Outside, laughter carried faintly from a neighbor's yard, sharp and careless. A sound that didn't belong in this house. Maya looked from me to the box, then to her mother. Erin's lips parted but no sound came. Nate reached forward like he might open it himself, then stopped, hand curling back into his lap. "It's empty," I said again, softer this time. "Just like your promises." No one touched the food after that. The oranges gleamed untouched. The roast sat cooling, the candles guttered lower. They stared at the box as if it might speak, but it never would. Its silence was the truest thing on the table. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping the floor. "Keep the folder," I told them. "Read the paper. Believe it or not, it doesn't change. Read May Black's R. No one stopped me when I stood. The box stayed behind, foil catching the last of the candlelight. When I opened the door, the night air rushed in, clean and sharp. For a moment I just stood there, listening to the faint chorus of families in warm rooms up and down the street. Then I stepped out, leaving the smell of rosemary, the glow of candles, and the silence of an empty box behind me. The cold hit my face like clean glass when I stepped outside. Behind me the door shut with a hollow click, sealing in the smell of rosemary and smoke. I didn't look back. The street stretched quiet except for the crunch of my boots on snow. Each step sank deep, the ice giving way with a sound like paper tearing. My breath clouded in front of me, dissolving before I could see where it went. Houses on either side glowed steady, yellow squares of light pressed against the night. Families moved inside them, shadows setting dishes, lifting children, leaning close in ways they didn't have to rehearse. I walked past those windows like a ghost, not belonging to any of them. The cut on my palm had opened again when I lifted the red box onto their table. Blood marked the corner of the napkin I'd carried out in my pocket. I rubbed it between my fingers as I walked, stiff with cold now, darker than the snow around it. Proof that even silence costs something. At the corner, a dog barked and pulled against its leash, eager to go back indoors. Its owner tugged once, gently, and the animal obeyed, tail wagging, disappearing into warmth. I stood still for a moment, watching the door close, hearing the muffled laughter inside. That was how belonging looked from the outside. A door shutting you out, but never slamming. The truck waited under a thin crust of frost, windshield fogged over. I sat behind the wheel and let the engine cough itself awake. The heater sputtered, blowing air that smelled of dust and metal, not warmth. I didn't mind. Heat had always been temporary. I pulled the notebook from my coat pocket. The page with the line down the middle lay open, edges curling. On one side, the strike against Maya. On the other, the unraveling of Aaron. Balanced columns, nothing more, nothing less. I closed it and slid it back into my pocket. The streetlights cast long shadows over the snow, sharp lines crossing the road like tally marks. Each one a reminder. Debts had weight. And tonight, some of them had shifted off my shoulders. The truck rolled forward slow, tires crunching against the frozen ground. In the rearview mirror, Maya's house shrank into another glowing square, no different from the others, except for the silence pressed behind its walls. I gripped the wheel with both hands, blood drying along my palm, and let the night carry me back toward the bay. The bungalow was dark when I returned. The back door stuck in the frame, swollen from the damp, and I had to lean my shoulder against it before it gave. The air inside was colder than the night. My breath hung in the room like a ghost that refused to leave. I switched on the lamp. Its light was weak, buzzing, spilling only far enough to show the table and the drawer beneath it. The kettle sat where I'd left it, ring of rust at its base, the handle still warm from memory alone. I laid the folded napkin on the table. A faint smear of blood marked its corner, dried now into the fabric. I smoothed it flat with my palm, as if it were just another page in the ledger. From the drawer, I took out the envelopes 40, then 80, then 120, thin layers of paper, curling at the edges, each marked with dates in my own hand. I placed the newest one on top, tonight's envelope, the one that carried no money but something heavier, proof. Beside it I set the notebook. The line I had drawn down the middle was still there. One side already filled Maya, served, Bay and Birch exposed. The other, Aaron her donations unmasked, her image unraveling, balanced columns. But balance on paper isn't the same as balance in the body. My hand still throbbed, raw from work, the cuts swollen where the cold had bitten deepest. I flexed them once, twice, and let the ache remind me that truth costs skin as well as ink. I turned the page and drew a new line. No names written yet, just space, waiting. The heater clicked but didn't catch. Outside, the bay groaned with shifting ice, low and restless. I could hear children's laughter still faintly from a neighbor's house, the sound traveling over thin walls. Their voices were steady, carrying warmth that never reached here. I sipped from the chipped mug, the tea inside little more than colored water. It burned my tongue anyway. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. The drawer closed with a tired thud, swallowing the envelopes and the notebook together. I sat in the silence, the ghost of Rosemary still clinging to my clothes, and thought, I am poorer than ever, but lighter too. Paper does not forget. And mine had only begun to speak. The night passed without sleep. I sat at the table, lamp buzzing above me, until the dark outside the window began to pale. By dawn, the bay groaned under its frozen skin. Ice shifted in long cracks that echoed through the bungalow walls. Each sound was low and hollow, like bones breaking underwater. I pushed the curtain aside. The horizon bled faint pink, the kind of color that never reached this room. Frost had crawled up the inside of the glass during the night, jagged patterns of white pressing against the light as if trying to hold it back. Across the narrow street, a neighbor shoveled his walk. The scrape of the blade against concrete came steady, rhythmic, almost calming. His breath showed in bursts, his head bent to the work, his dog watching from the porch with its tail curled tight. Their door stood open just enough to leak warmth into the morning. When he finished, he leaned the shovel against the wall and went inside, dog bounding ahead. The door closed, soft, certain. I turned back to my table. The envelopes lay stacked in the drawer, the notebook hidden beneath them, but I could feel their weight. Paper doesn't warm a room. It doesn't fill a stomach. But it keeps its shape when the night ends, and that was more than I could say for anything else I had left. The kettle gave a dry hiss when I set it on the burner. The water inside had frozen overnight. Ice clinked against the metal as it began to melt. I broke the last tea bag in half to make it last longer, the paper tearing unevenly in my hands. Half for now, half for later. That was how life went. The steam fogged the air once more, softening the sharp smell of rust. I cupped the chipped mug in both hands, letting the heat sting the cracked skin until it felt like something alive again. For a moment I thought of Maya's kitchen, the glow of candles, the untouched oranges in their bowl. Then I thought of Erin's shawl slipping from her shoulders, her face lit by the cold light of her phone. Their warmth had always been borrowed. Mine came slow, from rust and steam, but it was mine. Outside, children's voices rang as they dragged sleds across the crusted snow, their laughter skipping past my window before fading down the hill. I sat still, mug pressed to my chest, listening until the sound disappeared into distance. The sun climbed higher, but the bungalow stayed dim. I knew then. Paper had balanced some columns, but not all. The page I left blank would not stay blank. Names have a way of finding their place. And until they did, I would wait. The light on the table was thin, more gray than gold. It caught on the rim of the chipped mug, a circle that looked brighter than it felt. The tea had gone cold hours ago, but I kept the cup near, holding it like a stone I wasn't ready to set down. The drawer complained when I pulled it open. Inside, the envelopes slumped against each other, their edges soft, their numbers small but steady. I lifted the notebook and opened it flat. The last page waited, one column filled, the other left open, a line down the middle, like a cut that hadn't healed. My hand shook as I took the pen, fingers swollen, skin cracked. The ink bled slow across the page when I pressed it down, leaving marks darker than I intended. I didn't write a name this time, just one word, across the top, ledger. The sound of the pen against the paper was louder than the house itself. Outside, the bay shifted under the ice, groaning low, carrying a weight it couldn't hold forever. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed on the way to school, the sound carried sharp through the morning air before it vanished into distance. I shut the book. My palm left a faint red smear where the blood hadn't dried. Ink and blood together. Neither would wash out. The drawer closed with a heavy thud. The room stayed still. The walls breathed cold. No one knocked. No one called. I sat with the mug in my hands, waiting for the steam that wasn't there. The light kept changing. The page in the drawer did not.